everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my Book Naturalist book club review for the book that we chose for the month of February. I realize I'm a day late. I meant to get this done by the end of February, but my last week of February ended up being a complete crazy mess, so it just didn't happen. So it's March 1st, but we're still going to do a review for the February book, which was Spillover by David Quammen. This is a book I read a couple of years ago on ebook, and for Christmas, my mother and father gifted me this paperback copy, and so that was perfect for me to reread this book for February for the Book Naturalist Book Club. So this is a book that was originally written in 2012, and David Quammen is a well-known science writer. He writes a lot about infectious diseases, and this particular book is about zoonosis. So it's about diseases that make the jump from animal populations or other populations in the wild into the human population. And he goes through various different types of diseases, from Ebola to AIDS to Nipah virus, touches a little bit on malaria, talks about influenza and SARS, and there may be a few other big ones that he talks about in there, but those are the ones that stick out in my mind. It's quite a large book, and it is, it's very science focused. So, but I think that David Quammen does an excellent job of talking about scientific theory and scientific practices and the field of infectious disease and infectious disease research in a way that makes it accessible for the general reader. So I think that he is an amazing writer, and this is one of my very favorite books that I have read in the science field, and David Quammen is a favorite author of mine. So this book in particular, I found, even though it was written in 2012, it's very prescient about zoonosis and what the next spillover that causes a lot of havoc in the human population might be. What's the next big one, basically? In infectious disease research, the next big one is sort of this mythological bug that's out there that is similar to the big one, like for an earthquake, right? Like everybody's waiting for the big one to occur. Well, infectious disease scientists are waiting for the next big one to occur in terms of a pandemic, in terms of a disease that appears in the human population and just like spreads through our population and just completely devastates us in the way that the 1917-1918 influenza outbreak did. That killed 50 million people worldwide, are estimated to have killed 50 million people worldwide. So that was a huge zoonosis that happened, and we didn't really understand at the time what was happening, but now we have a lot more science that tells us we're a lot more better prepared in terms of the science to detect these sorts of spillovers quickly, and then hopefully have a reasonable response. Although he talks about the various things that are in our favor and the various things that are working against us in terms of that. But the thing that David Quammen does is he goes around the world and he shadows, basically, or follows around these researchers as they do their work, whether it's in Africa, traveling through the jungle, trying to find monkey populations to sample for potentially having Ebola or simian AIDS, the precursor to AIDS, which was found in simians. So he does a lot of that type of thing, and he talks a lot about how these researchers are basically detectives. They are disease detectives, and they are out there risking their own lives in order to get the data that is needed to figure out where diseases come from and how we might respond to them as humans, vaccine development or treatment development, that sort of thing. Very, very interesting, and actually the way that he writes it makes it quite exciting in places. There's a lot of really interesting stories on the ground about places where disease has spilled over from animal populations and how those local populations dealt with it, and then the teams of scientists that come in to try to figure out what's going on and what they can do to help. Very, very interesting. So I did, as always, mark out a little spot here to talk about. And in this particular case, I thought it would be appropriate for the particular time period that we're in to talk about this particular zoonosis. Let's see. Oops, I'm on the wrong flag. Here we're on the right flag. Have you noticed the persistent low-level buzz about avian influenza, the strain known as H5N1, among disease experts over the past 15 years? That's because avian flu worries them deeply, though it hasn't caused many human fatalities. Swine flu comes and goes periodically in the human population, as it came and went during 2009, sometimes causing a bad pandemic, and sometimes, as in 2009, not so bad as expected. But avian flu resides in a different category of menacing possibility. It worries the flu scientists because they know that H5N1 influenza is, 1, extremely virulent in people, with a high lethality, though a relatively low number of cases, and yet 2, poorly transmissible so far from human to human. It'll kill you if you catch it, very likely, but you're unlikely to catch it except by butchering an infected chicken. Most of us don't butcher our own chickens, and health officials all over the world have been working hard to assure that the chickens we handle, dead, disarticulated, wrapped in plastic, or otherwise, have not been infected. But if H5N1 mutates or reassembles itself in just the right way, if it adapts for human-to-human transmission, then H5N1 could become the biggest and fastest killer disease since 1918. And obviously, we're experiencing a bird flu outbreak in the United States, which so far, I think it has spilled over a couple of places, but it seems to have confined itself to the bird population at this time. But it does bear watching, and particularly, as we experienced the coronavirus pandemic a few years ago, a lot of what he's talking about here was very prescient about what could possibly happen. And in fact, several of the experts that he interviews in this book say that they think at the time, in 2012, when this book was published, they thought that coronavirus was the group of viruses that they were most afraid something would come out of that and be a pandemic. And so they were spot on. I hope they bought lottery tickets because they were spot on in that regard. So yeah, if you're interested in sort of a book that is talking about diseases that impact humans, but that come from other species in the world, other animals, birds, mammals, insects, transmission, that sort of thing. If you're interested in that, it's a good book. But also, if you're interested in sort of a detective story, like how do we figure this out? How do we know where these diseases come from? And how do they determine which animals these diseases might have spilled over from? I find it very fascinating to read about that type of a topic. So I really enjoyed my read of Spillover by David Quammen. I hope that you did too. So that's what we read for February. And then in March, we'll be reading one of my favorite science nonfictions of all time. This is The Forest Unseen, A Year's Watch in Nature by David George Haskell. David George Haskell is a scientist from the southeastern part of the United States, Tennessee, and he took a whole year and observed a 1 meter square plot of forest in his neighborhood. And throughout the year, so different seasons, different months, different circumstances in terms of weather and that sort of thing. And he observed what he saw in that 1 square meter plot of land. And it's just such a love letter to nature. This book is such a love letter to nature, and David George Haskell is an excellent writer. So I'm very excited to reread The Forest Unseen. I hope that you will pick up a copy and join us in the month of March. If you did read Spillover by David Quammen, please let me know in the comments down below and let me know what you thought of it. I'd be very interested to hear. And I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I'll talk to you later.